Thank you so much, everybody. It's great to see you, especially late this afternoon. But I guess we're going to be going till after dark. So want to welcome my wonderful panelists here. We've got a really great conversation teed up for, I'll tell you what my contact information is. You can find me on LinkedIn. With respect to our panelists, they're all going to provide us with some really interesting and varied perspectives on change management and really maximizing adoption and long-term kind of muscle memory in the change that we need to do in the legal industry. So I will start by introductions. The first one, directly to my left, Sonia, is a trademark attorney and course instructor. She's the founder of Lakhany Law, PC, an award-winning trademark law firm, and focuses her practice on counseling business owners on how to use trademark registrations to protect their catchy business names, logos, and taglines. In addition to managing her firm, she's the founder of 2 Weeks to Trademarks, the first and only online course that not only teaches how to practice trademarks, but how to market and get clients as well. Steve, I got it right in the right order here. Steve is the managing partner of Roseman Law, a full-service real estate and business law firm based out of California. Roseman Law has 15 attorneys, 31 employees, and 5 offices throughout California. And last but not least, Angela is a lawyer and life coach, founder of Sage Legal LLC and Big Life Leaps Coaching. She coaches other solo lawyers who have left firms or corporate life to start their own practices, helps her clients with figuring out how to get the business basics up and running quickly, figuring out an admin automation strategy using Clio, and the piece that often gets left out of the business coaching process for solo lawyers, managing the mindset issues that come up along the way with starting something new. She's also a certified firewalk instructor. So welcome. Thank you all three for joining me up here. I'm really excited to get into this. I think it's something that is a conversation that's really incredibly needed in our industry. I've been heartened to see over the years, the first buzzword was innovation, then it was blockchain, then a few more, and then change management, but it's still rife with kind of uncertainty for lawyers and kind of confusion about what it actually means. So I'm going to set the stage a little bit with some background on change management, and then we're going to dive into a series of interesting discussion questions. So the first thing to really realize, and I think all of us kind of innately do realize this, though, is that change is daunting. Right? Humans perceive, whether consciously or otherwise, that change represents some kind of inherent loss of some kind. At minimum, it's going to require significant alteration to your daily routine. Some may fear they might not be able to adapt to it. And change can also kind of, without exaggeration, it really can sometimes represent an existential threat to your identity, legitimacy, your locus of control, and provoke, emotional defense reactions. So that's just normal people, right? When we're talking about the legal industry, we're tradition rich, we're even more susceptible to these dynamics. It's designed to stand on precedence. It's not typically user or client centric, and lawyers tend to often think of their work product as bespoke, impossible to replicate or automate, and they charge accordingly. Established legal professionals have a strong psychological and emotional stake in maintaining the status quo. They've invested years of their lives into these personal and professional structures. So as hard as it is for one person to overcome the fear of change, we're really dealing with an entire industry going through the process simultaneously. There's varying levels of acceptance, grief, and motivation to adapt. Convincing people to embrace change is the biggest challenge of change management. And that's something that our panelists are really well-versed in explaining good examples on. It requires a combination of structural changes that reward change, cultural changes that encourage it, and individuals being those kind of first flags who are open to new approaches. So if any elements are overlooked, change efforts are really not likely to succeed. It's not necessarily the act of changing that's difficult, but rather, recognizing the value of change, which really needs to be embraced from leadership all the way down to each and every person that's affected. And in a law firm or a legal department, those things, there's a lot of customized structures around which you have to navigate the nuances. So to create a workplace that welcomes change and creative thinking about new ways to deliver client service, leaders need to consciously model and communicate the value of the change. It starts with providing a safe place for employees to ask questions and recognize the possibilities of working in a different way and supporting that new approach structurally. So, just before we get to the questions, I want to emphasize, most environments offer opportunities to sort of nudge employees and their behavior by making small changes to the context in which decisions are made and improve the outcomes. This all sounds very theoretical, but by doing this, rather than trying to entirely change how people think, or in our case, an industry, is a central theme really in behavioral economics and change management. So I hope that kind of lays a groundwork for us, for any of you that were not really familiar with the practice and the area of change management and change design. And with that, why don't we just dive into our panel discussion? So I've got a kind of a preliminary question, and each of you can jump in however you'd like. How are each of you driving the business process transformation in your own roles, in your own organizations, at a high level? Like, what are you responsible for effectively transforming? Maybe we can start with Angela, because I know you help Clio attorneys automate their processes to minimize admin.
Sure. So it really starts with me and my own practice. So I do still have my own practice. I do mostly estate planning, and on a pretty much daily basis, I am constantly asking myself, how can I make this easier for me? How can I make this easier for my clients? How can I create a better experience for my clients? It's really a laboratory for me.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, you have to spearhead change in firms, both as a coach as well as in your other roles. And you mentioned that you really can't force people to change. You have to inspire them to change. And there are some great thoughts on that from, would either of you like to jump in?
Yeah, I can jump in. So I think for me, taking sort of the small firm perspective, it's really intimate, the day-to-day environment that we work in, right? So we are remote, our entire team is remote. And so being able to have that remain our environment, I think relates to wanting to lead by example and say, okay, if these are the things I'm asking of my team, I need to lead by example and make sure that I do the things I'm asking of them. And where we see change and change management the most, at least in our environment, is when it comes to SOPs. So from the beginning, the creation of them, the maintenance of them, the updating of them, all the things that go into the checklist, down to minutia and very detailed screenshots and comments and sidebars, because the promise of my firm, both on the law firm side and the education side, is that you can be remote, everyone's remote, and it's extremely lifestyle friendly, where we really mean it in the sense that most of my team members have small children, with the exception of me, actually. Everybody has small children. And so the promise is that it's a flexible lifestyle. It's a flexible hour system. If one of the babies is sick and you need to run to urgent care, it's not a problem. You just have to let everybody else know, and there won't be a penalty for it. And so we start with the why from the top down and say, in order for this company to run successfully and to keep the remote aspect where you don't ever have to come into the office, and to keep that lifestyle flex promise of you can swap one another in and out, we have to have accurate SOPs and checklists. That's the only way that team members can swap in and out of each other's duties with seamlessness. And so I think knowing the why of why I push SOPs so much and processes, it's so clear because it trickles down to something that they can understand every single day. And so it drives the motivation to update the SOP when something changes, to correct it, to keep it updated, because it serves a why that they can really relate to.
You know, from our perspective, being a larger firm, it's very different when it comes to integrating, whether it's technology or some other innovative ideas into the firm. So our catalyst that really got us to move into the arena of going very technologically advanced was really an earthquake in California. We said if an earthquake hits and our server in the LA office goes down, how is that going to impact on all the other offices? But the important point when we looked at integrating technology in the firm was an important step to explain to people why we're doing it. You know, and often people say, but we've been practicing this way for so many years, our billing hours are there, we are fine the way we are, why do we need to do this? So that was the first important hurdle to be able to explain it. So each time we've integrated another element of technology to assist in firm management, to assist in productivity, to allow for remote use, was to explain the motivation behind why we're doing it. Why do we go cloud-based? Why do we have a firm management software? Why do we monitor this, monitor that? And so that was the first buy-in. We started with upper management within the structure, and we had a lot of meetings talking to the upper structure saying, let me explain to you what the benefit is of moving over into this system that we're using. And whenever anybody said, well, but we've been fine for so many years, we always said the same thing. Just because you've been doing it this way for so many years doesn't make it right. You've got to take the benefit. It's the same as a doctor where you say, there's new microsurgery. Yeah, but they've been cutting knees open for years. Why do we need to change over to the new technology? So we spent a lot of time focusing on explaining the benefits. And once we did that, then it was a question of getting buy-in from people. Do we get buy-in from everybody? Absolutely not. And that's the element of accountability that ties in where now we're introducing a system, making sure that it's used, educating, and making sure that people take advantage of it and what the benefit is and what it brings to the table.
Yeah, and it's an ongoing practice. It's always under refinement. I love your concept of kind of continually updating procedures and everybody feeling as though they are part and parcel of the solution, and really understanding how it impacts them is incredible. Now that's all like very, you know, it sounds great. I get a lot of law firm leaders asking me, you know, is it visible? Is change management visible? We don't have any change management. And actually, you really do, as long as you have people who are trained and understand the whole industry of change management and how you actually work with people as an individual. The best change management, it's kind of an industry buzzword. You can use a lot of different words, but really just encouraging and implementing adoption of new processes, tech, teams. The best change management is that in which you don't know it's happening, right? Someone's managing it from the perspective of buy-in, as we've really talked about here a lot, but also the benefits, the motivations, overcoming resistance, and we'll get into those things in a minute. But so let's move on to the next question. Well, actually, before we do, one thing I just want to mention is, you know, on an individual level, lawyers, of course, many of whom are at this conference, who understand that legal expertise is really only one facet of the services that they provide, that they're no longer the only game in town, they're more likely to grasp that the necessity of finding new business processes and ways to deliver value to clients in a rapidly shifting marketplace, such as we find ourselves in. And it feels like quicksand many days. There's a wealth of opportunity, and not to mention urgency, around collaborating, scale, productizing, and more along those lines. Once you see that the state of the industry clearly, those things are come into focus very sharply. And so, you know, I recommend just choosing one to get started. Consider how it could be improved with technology. Consider, you know, one process or one thing that just, you know, what keeps you up at night in terms of your practice. You know, how could this one thing be improved potentially with technology? The technology you have already. Is anybody here using Clio to its full potential? I can't imagine, right? And really kind of, could it be implemented with technology? Could it be improved in that way? Could you adjust the business process in some way? And then working through the kind of the broad themes, and you don't have to be an expert. You just have to be thinking in this kind of different way. So along those lines, I'd love to talk about some examples of successful or failed business process, or talk to, transformation initiatives. It can be about adopting technology, Clio or other, or kind of a people or workflow focused transformation. Does anybody have, let's start with you, Sonia. Good example to start us off.
I was going to offer up a fail story because I feel like those are more fun and entertaining than the success ones. You can assume that change goes well majority of the time or half the time, but what about the times that it doesn't go so well? And I think those are more interesting. So I'm happy to share some intimacy. So one of the values that I really try to adhere to as a leader within my firm and on the education side is, really that essence of come to me with your ideas, correct me. I want your input. If you think there's a better way to do something more efficient or, even more cost effective, if it applies, right? Like I want to hear about that. And I want my team members to feel comfortable that even though we have SOPs and processes and a way that we do things, that's not set in stone and it's always open to change and improvement. So balancing that with, though, the inexperience in a certain area of a team member, right? Because, I'm a leader for a reason. I've been down this road. I've encountered this challenge before. So the fail story was actually about a month and a half ago. So it's fairly recent. And I hired a new team member for the education side of my company that I'm building out. And we were talking about a particular function. And she said, okay, well, in my previous role, we used XYZ software, and I think it would solve the problem. And I had just finished giving her the speech, maybe within the week before that, because I had just hired her, of, listen, I'm not a regular boss. I'm a cool boss. You can come tell me anything. And if you have improvements, I want to know. And please, chime in. And, my way is not the only way. And I had just given her the entire thing. And so then she's like, okay, well, in my previous role at my other company, we did this with this software. And, I'm looking out for you. And it's a fraction of the price. We could get, and I'm like, oh no, I already tried that software. I already demoed it. And it's one of those rare, it's one of those instances where you get what you pay for. And I get why it's cheaper because it doesn't do this one thing that we need. And so I don't know if you'd call it a fail, but I felt like it was a bit of a shortcoming where I'm having to balance that invitation to contribute and to, help improve things along the way with, well, okay, but not that, because that's not going to work. And so it's hard, and I remember having the conversation. I said, I don't want this to stifle you. I don't want this to make you think that I didn't mean what I said the other day. But just in this particular instance, I've already demoed that. And I know, because from experience, I know it's not a right fit. And that's why we're not using that one. And she was like, okay. And I was like, oh, so it was a fail to me of a type, but we rolled past it, and she's still giving input on other things. So I think we're okay.
Oh, good. Yeah. Well, I mean, that's just a testament to the fact that a lot of it is cultural, right? I mean, people have to feel safe psychologically in order to kind of bring things like that to the table. It sounds like we're
doing great.
Yeah. How about you, Steve? Do you have an example?
I've got a couple of good examples, but I think what really starts on a firm where there's a number of employees, whether it's attorneys who are very staid in their ways or support teams, which I think are far more creative and willing to take on systems, is first of all getting buy-in. And I think that's crucial to explain why we're using what we're using. Then saying to them, we've got this system, we've got this technology, education. So one thing I'll give Clio tremendous credit for, before, when an employee starts in our firm, they spend 2 days of training. They spend at least 6 hours watching the Clio videos from beginning to end to allow them to be able to get the systems in place. Then I think once they're there, it's the follow-up to ensure that they keep doing it. But there are resistance. I mean, I laugh. We've got one attorney who was always opposed to change. I mean, even change to the point of simple changes. And I laugh because we still pick on him today when he complained that his computer wasn't working and frustrated as all hell, and he wanted to smash his computer, wasn't broken. And as a joke, I said, have you checked that it's plugged into the wall? As a pure joke. And of course, the cleaners the day before had knocked the plug out, so it hadn't been plugged in. And I thought, wow, I'm going to get him to now use this technology when he's still struggling on getting power to the computer. So,
Right.
but I do have pushback, and I tell you, it is very tough. And we've got one particular lawyer in our firm who is very savvy, but he is insistent on writing down his time for the month and then inputting it at the end of the month. And if you want to look at statistics on the firm and you want to look at where's billing, and I cannot get him to shift over. And it's an immensely frustrating process because it delays the billing process in doing that. So I think a lot of it is education, a lot of it is trying really, really hard, and then holding people accountable. And you say, if you as a senior attorney in the firm are unwilling to do it, they look to you as an example. How do you expect everyone else in the firm if you don't set the example? So it is tough, but it takes a lot of training, and especially when the firm is slightly larger, you really have to explain, and you have to keep going back to the drawing board. And it is frustrating, I'll be perfectly honest.
Yeah.
But
well, and I think you touched on a really important point, because it's not just a tech rollout and an implementation. So before I became an attorney, I worked in change management consulting in big tech. And a lot of what I did was change readiness assessments. So post-sale, we would come in as a team and figure out, how, do interviews from top to bottom, like how hard is this going to be, basically, and creating these long-range implementation plans that would be much more than simply the implementation, but really, how are you going to get folks invested in it? How are you going to get them to do this long-term, like I mentioned earlier, I like to call it muscle memory. So how are you going to, and this is going on right now with ChatGPT and AI right now, all over with law firms, where we have no way of knowing what that technology is going to be able to do for us, or how we're going to, workflows we'll be able to use it with in 6 months, a year. So what we really need to be working on is, how do you change the muscle memory to make the legal professionals click on that when they encounter something. They have to start referring to it for some things and knowing that is going to grow. It's really much more about the behavior, kind of modification of their own behavior, essentially. How about you, Angela? I'd love to hear some implementation stories.
Yeah, I'll share. I'm going to share one of my stories as well that was started as a failure, but, spoiler alert, it ends in success. So I've restarted my own solo practice now 3 times. That's a whole other panel conversation. But the second time that I did it, I hired a consultant, I worked with coaches, and I was very intentional about wanting to set up my practice so that there were processes in place, so that I had some admin automation in place. And I spent tens of thousands of dollars on a super complicated system that was so difficult. If I knew how to use it, it would have saved me a ton of time, but it was taking me so much time to learn how to use it that I was feeling like a failure. Like, it was starting to impact how I felt about myself as a human. It was not a healthy place to be. So I hired somebody specifically to help figure the system out, and she couldn't figure it out either. And I was, starting to feel really badly about myself. So this is where the mindset management comes in. And eventually that was one reason why I got burned out, and I decided to step away from my dream of having my practice and go back to work for another firm. And I did that, and I lasted a week before I realized that was just not a place I wanted to be. So restarted my practice again. And at that point, I decided that I was going to figure it out, and I was going to start with the bare minimum, and I was going to do it as simply as I could. And that's when I went to Clio. And looking back, if I had realized, 10 years ago, what Clio could do for me, and I actually went back through my emails, I talked to them 10 years ago. And I didn't start working with them until maybe 6 years ago. If I had done that so many years ago, I would have saved myself a lot of headaches, a lot of money, a lot of time, probably some tears. But the thing that was lacking when I spent all that money on having somebody else set up my systems for me was what I now call the belief triad. And there are other versions of the belief triad, but for me, what that means is I had to believe in myself. I had to believe that I was capable of doing the things that would make my life easier. I had to believe that it was possible in general to do things that were going to make my life easier. And then the third thing I had to believe in was that it was going to make a difference. So because I didn't want to spend a lot of time and effort and energy and trying to figure something out that was going to leave me feeling like that really expensive system did, that it didn't make a difference. So I did it. So I've now built my own system in Clio for my own practice. That's what I teach other lawyers now how to do. And it's just finding the simplest process to make meaningful change in my life and to help other people find that. So
it's really interesting that you mentioned that, because I did a podcast, like Geek in Review, I think it was, or no, maybe it was a different one, but it was actually about change management for solos and how different it is, because you're kind of acting upon yourself, right? And Steve and Sonia's perspective is different, right? I mean, in many ways, you're leading the charge with and encountering this external resistance, and the lawyers who are reluctant, or they lack the belief that it's actually doable or that it's desirable. And so you've got like the trifecta almost of like kind of realizing that and having to handle it as well. And I think that probably speaks to a lot of folks' experience in this room, because no matter where you are on that continuum, you have to understand and be patient with yourself and others about change is difficult and how do you move through it. And just shifting your perspective just a little actually can be incredibly valuable.
In respect to that issue,
yeah.
And it's interesting because the one thing I've learned, if I don't believe in it, nobody else is going to believe in it. So that's why I'm here at the ClearCon, for example, looking at the new technology, the new innovations, the new ideas. I have to buy into it. I've got to get educated and knowledgeable. So when I have resistance from anybody in the firm, one, I understand how it works. Two, I understand where the blockage is for them and why they don't understand the value, and walk them through the value of doing it. And I think at the higher level of the firm, you've got to get people to understand the value. And the ongoing education and these types of conferences is exactly what helps, but you have to get buy-in, because in order to be able to go to the next level, if they can tell you're not bought in on the software and using it, why do they need to?
And I know one of you was going to jump in, was it?
Oh, I think I was. Yeah, and I was going to say, and staying connected to the why, which I think is very similar to what Steve was saying. I had to really, for me going through that process, I had to remind myself of why it mattered and why I cared about being able to step away from the desk at a reasonable time. And as a divorced parent of 2 kids, I had a lot of reasons why I would like to make my life easier in the office. So.
Yeah, I mean, and to Steve's point, it's incredible, and your kind of open-ended communication style with your team is really it's so critical to this kind of thing successfully happening, because you have to constantly be training and educating, following up, holding accountable, exactly how you're talking about, and encouraging leadership to be early adopters and evangelists in a way that understands that there may be a short-term dip in P&L, or there may, while you get up to speed with these things. I worked at a massive law firm for many years, up until about a couple of years ago. And one of the things that we fought really hard to implement was an innovation hour, which was essentially the billable equivalent hours to kind of do that training and experimentation. Now, of course, not everybody has that kind of bandwidth, and not only that, but even with that available, there was still resistance, because is that the most important thing I should be doing? Is my partner going to be mad about it? That kind of thing. So anyway, so I would love to ask this question. I think we're good on time. So when it works well, like what kinds of positive outcomes have you seen and experienced? Anybody?
Sure, I could tell you from our perspective.
Yeah.
It took us a while. I mean, we went cloud-based 11, 12 years ago. In fact, we were even using Google Meets at the time, where we were video conferencing in long before COVID. And the advantage we had was when COVID hit, literally people unplugged their computer at the office, plugged in at home, and Monday morning we were up and running. And I laid the groundwork in the sense that I said, we can work remotely, but there needs to be accountability. So from 9 a.m. to 6 p.m., you need to be camera ready. So if somebody calls you on Zoom, you need to be available. And we've been doing that internally. But the value of getting buy-in and the value of utilization has a number of factors. One, especially working remote. And I can tell you in California, if you run an ad for a new lawyer or support staff, if you don't offer remote, you'll get 80% less resumes coming in. It is a given in California, people work remotely, which is beneficial in many respects from a cost-cutting perspective, from a business point of view. So I think once you get buy-in, once they start utilizing it, from a business perspective, there's huge value. So you can look at revenue generators, you can look at markers, you can look at performance. You can, as long as you take advantage of the software and the technology and you use it, you can then take the data and information within the system. But what lawyers forget about, or managing partners or people running firms are, it's one thing utilizing it, but what does it bring to the table? Okay, billable hours are great. You can track that. You can, you can track your calendar, but how does that make it better?
Exactly.
So then the question is, what do you extract from that in running productivity reports, running billable hours, running non-billable hours, as well as billable hours to see, are people doing things elsewhere? When are they on the system? So there's a lot of the analytical side of the data that I don't think people really take advantage of.
I think that's a great point, and I'd love to hear what the other panelists think. And I didn't ask you this before, so I won't really put you on the spot, but if you have any like metrics or ideas around like what, how implementations of Clio or a particular billing system or process have impacted your bottom line, it would be great to hear those. But yeah, go ahead.
Sure, I would love to chime in. And it really sort of adds on to the perspective about the business benefit is, when you have clarity, so successful change results in clarity across the board for everyone, right? And clarity creates happiness at work. It's one of the components, and happy team members create success on all the levels, financially and otherwise. And so, something that's been really special for us over I've been practicing a little over 13 years, and the last 8 and change have been on my own, with me owning the firm. And we've had such little turnover that, it really is a testament. I think I had to look inward to see like, well, this can't be an accident and you're doing something right, And so it's what's going on? And I realized that it's when you have clarity, when everybody knows what their roles are and how to do them, and that they're poised for success, that you're setting them up for success where they have the procedures, they have the tools, they have the budget for things. You have happier team members. And so, we all know, or a lot of us will find out soon enough, that the cost of hiring a new team member is really high, and we want to try to avoid it at all costs. It's much cheaper and more cost effective to keep a current team member and figure out what the snags are. And so happier team members equal better retention, less turnover, and the company runs more smoothly, because think about how much time we have to take away from our management and leadership to train, to hire, to your point about even putting a posting out and making sure it's worded correctly. And of course, we have an SOP for that. We do. We have a template. But the hiring and the interviews is such a whole headache. So when you have happier team members as a result of clarity, I think everybody's happier across the board. And then you see really great financial growth because they're invested. They've been here for a while, and they really want to chime in and make sure the company runs better. And it's not just a place they log into every day.
Well, and would you say that translates into like the culture that you're describing? Would you say it translates into kind of a flexibility and openness when like the next change comes along? Because there's always going to be, Yeah,
I think so. I think, when it goes smoothly once or twice or with minimal snags, I think there's much more openness to it. And then, what's really cool now is we're turning a leaf of that invitation of, okay, well, what do you think if we did it like this? But that bravery has to come and that comfort. So it's about also creating an environment that is open and receptive to that. And to my story earlier, one of the things I'm learning is to entertain new ideas. Even it's tricky, but I'm like, I have a feeling this is probably not going to work, but go forth and explore it, because I want to encourage that participation and that innovation. And if you stifle it, I mean, human nature is human nature. If someone gets turned down twice, even if it's for legitimate reasons, like, no, we already demoed that software, but that third time they may be more hesitant. So sometimes you have to let people bark up that tree and try it anyway. So
well, it's really a question of cost, right? What is it going to cost to do it? And if I've been there, done it, seen it, I tell you it doesn't work, but they want to implement it, you've got to really make a judgment. Am I going to allow that to happen, right?
Yeah.
And you've got to try and explain it. And it's a difficulty because a lot of people, especially new people to the firm, but experienced people, when you give them that opportunity to say, what are your thoughts? And they say, well, we use this technology. I know you've got a technology, but this does this. And it's hard to say, I've been there, done it, seen it. I've had the firm for 27 years, and I promise you I've been there. It didn't work. So it's a very interesting psychological hurdle you have to overcome to be able to still get the results you need, but get buy-in from that person, but at the same time say, I'm not shutting you down, but let me explain to you why it didn't work.
Did you have anything you wanted to add?
I do. So I was sitting here listening to all these wonderful answers and thinking, like, what kind of metric can I talk about? And I'm going to share something. It actually goes more in the life coaching direction, and it's a metric that kind of like I try to listen to myself and my intuition a little more. And this number just kept coming at me, and I'll share something with all of you. So one of the things that I'm really passionate about is the concept of lawyer wellness. I run a lawyer wellness group for National Bar Association that I belong to. And staying connected to why all of this stuff matters is really important to me, because when our businesses are doing well and when it's easier for us to live our lives as a lawyer, the rest of our lives usually get better too. And it might be our own, physical health and wellness, or our relationships, or just how we feel about ourselves as people, as persons. So the metric that I want to share with you guys, though, so last year I decided to quit drinking for a month. I decided that in January of last year, and it took me till July of last year before I actually went an entire month. And I spoke at another conference last year in October, and I was able to stand up and say, hey, this is my 100th day of not drinking. And this is a group I've been a part of for like 20 years. And I was like the girl like dancing on the table, closing the bar down like every night. So that was a big deal. And I've shared that part of my story with other people, both lawyers and non-lawyers. And I now have 6 people who have come up to me and told me that they quit drinking because they felt like if I could do it, they could do it. And to me, that's just a part of getting better at life. But if I didn't have the business stuff in place, if I wasn't able to feel like I had done a really great job of making my work easier and having a really solid intake process and service delivery process, like I don't think that would have happened for me. So that's what I got. Sorry, no, it's a metric.
I sprung that one on you. I sprung that one. I know.
You contributed the personal perspective, because I think we've gone on, and rightly so, because the business aspect. But I love that you brought in a personal aspect, because I think so many of us think of things as like, this is my personal life and this is my business life. And then maybe I have a third column of like my life as a law firm owner. And really, it's all one life. It's one day that you do all those things and switch those hats. And I just love that you brought in that perspective, because if you can implement change in your personal life, it will better your business life. And if you can implement change successfully business-wise, it will probably make you a better human too. So I love that perspective.
100%.
And you keep learning.
Yeah.
Right? And one thing I'd really like to, so I get this question a lot. And when talking about change management in the legal profession, and let's just address it head on, right? So let's talk about the billable hour, right? So I like to call it the productivity paradox. So in a firm, if one attorney can take 2 hours to do something, the other one will take 4 hours to do the same thing. The client loves attorney A and the partner loves attorney B, right? So this is real, right? I mean, we've been talking about unchaining the billable hour for 20 years, right? But when you make legal services more efficient, you use less time doing that. And we can all talk about like the real, the benefits around having a flexible mind, essentially, like an innovation mindset, which in itself is a whole other panel discussion. But like, what do you say to folks that are wondering about this productivity paradox?
Please let me go first. Okay, so I do trademarks and trademarks only. So we are team flat fee across the board. And
there you go.
Yeah, and I mean, I came from firm life in the early years of billing by the hour for trademarks. And I was just like, I don't understand this. I am getting penalized for being fast. and efficient, because when you only do one thing, you get very good at it and you start to see all the different scenarios play out. And that, among other factors, was, one of the bases for wanting to branch out on my own and do things my way, right? And say, we're only going to do flat fees. And, there's so many arguments for it, but there's no penalty for being efficient. In fact, you're rewarded for efficiency. So again, when we think about the why and the trickle down of why do we implement change? Why do we continue looking for more efficient ways? Is that because we have no cap on the amount of business we can take.
Exactly.
And so, that obviously spells more revenue, higher salaries, higher bonuses. And again, there's a lot of why there too, is that, the less money we spend on software and stuff, the more money we can spend on you, meaning the team members. So bonuses, I can give you raises twice a year. I can do all these things because we're very clean and organized about how we do things. So, for us, there was no question of ever changing from the billable hour to flat fee. If anything, it was my change before I even started the firm. But I could never go back to the billable hour. There's just no way. I feel so strongly about flat fees. Yeah.
Well, can I come work for you?
Okay.
Can you do trademarks? Can you file a trademark?
So I've got the other side of the spectrum.
Yeah.
So I have billable hours. And it's a very interesting discussion because I came from an insurance defense background, 150 lawyers, big firm, where I'll never forget when the managing partner, when we first started, said 200 billables a month. And I remember one associate raising his hand and saying, well, what about our 2 weeks vacation? And the person said, I won't give you the exact words, but said, if you can do the math, if you bill 210 hours a month, you make up your 2 weeks vacation to get to that point. But from our firm's perspective, when I look at billing, my focus is on what's right for the client, not what's right for the firm. So I know I've got younger lawyers that take 10 hours to draft a document that should take 5. But I say to each one of those attorneys, bill exactly the time it takes you. Do not bill a time that you are not doing the work or you think 10 hours is too much. And on the other hand, I don't want to see you bill 2 hours for a 4-hour assignment, because that tells me as a young lawyer, you are skimming through this, and the devil's in the details as a lawyer. And do not skim. Turn over every rock when you're drafting a document or preparing some type of pleading. So I go through the bills in detail. It takes me 4 or 5 days a month just to go through them. I evaluate every one of them because I've obviously got their initials. I look at their billable time. I see how much time they've spent on assignments. I adjust them as necessary. I see partner review on certain assignments, and I either give the credit or the partner or the associate credit. But then I sit, and this comes back to the whole discussion about analytics and time. I sit with an associate and I say, okay, you billed 180 hours this month. I've cut you down to 130 hours. I know you're not hitting your marker, but let me explain where you are having difficulty. And I have one that constantly goes down the rabbit hole when he does research, but he's a genius at research. But so then we have to sit with the partner, sit with the associate and said, how do we train you so that you better understand your assignments, so that you're doing accurate billing and you're not going down this rabbit hole and spending 14 hours on an assignment that should take you 6.
Well, and that's a really good point, because if you were to implement something that it's somewhat of a nuance, because if you're looking to implement something that would speed up research, would that be a net positive for you, for the associate?
Absolutely.
Because
we just went over to case text, co-counsel.
Right.
And I can tell you this particular attorney has embraced it completely, and his research skills have escalated.
Interesting.
Not saying he didn't have good skill set, but the billable hour, I think law firms make a big mistake when the billable hour is everything. Because at the end of the day, and your point is well taken, that you have to have client satisfaction. I can tell you sometimes I'll even have people turn down job offers because they say your minimum billable is X. And I've said, we don't no longer have a minimum billable hours. We don't.
Yeah, right. Well, you won't hear any argument from me on that one.
As long as they hit their targets.
So maybe we should, let's kind of step back for a minute. I'd love to hear kind of lessons learned, top tips from each of you. Angela, let's start with you, because I think when we were talking, you had a great kind of thought about, how do we implement lasting change in the legal industry? It can be granular, it can be meta. And you had a really good thought about kind of listening to all parties, including the historians.
Yeah. Well, and I'm wondering what I said now, but
That's all good.
I hope I'm going to say something that was just as good. I think that there are so many facets to answer this question, and I think that Jack's keynote this morning, the KPIs and how to look at the stats, and just kind of like blew my mind away. Even though I read these reports anyway, but I think that's relevant to this conversation too, and the alternative billing options as well. And I think it's a matter of just having conversations about how we can do better and what are the challenges facing the industry, and listening to the historians and the sort of the naysayers of like the old guys who say we should proceed with caution when it comes to AI or when it comes to changing our billable model. Like, there are often lessons to be learned from those conversations, and not just let's shut that down and not listen to it. But I have kids, I have teenagers, and so sometimes they'll say things and I'm like, what? And I stop myself and think about what is it that they are really trying to say? And is there
and a bigger issue? Totally. I also have pre-teenagers. I always, it's so funny. It really is I'm just marketing. I'm marketing all the time. I'm explaining the benefit of things,
Change management, and it starts at home.
I guess, yeah.
And I think it's being brave enough to try something new and to lead by example and be willing to talk about things that haven't gone well and try to make them better, and just continuing to do that.
Implementing lasting change.
I will say that one thing that I've learned over the years is the incredible benefit of learning your team members' individual love languages. So for those of you not familiar with that concept, you may have heard of it in your personal life, but it's the idea that we each give and receive love differently. There's a book on it and a quiz and all these things. But the idea is that there's 5 core love languages, and they're in no particular order, like physical touch, acts of service, words of affirmation, gifts, and quality time. Oh, I'm impressed that I got all of them in one shot. And so, we hear about it. It came up in romantic relationships, and I realized that there's got to be a name for the concept in the business world, because it's so real to understand how each individual team member gives and receives work feedback and work love, right? So practically speaking, what does that look like? You may have one team member who doesn't want to be thanked. Words are nothing, right? Oh, great job, whatever. But it's like, hey, I haven't seen a raise in a couple of years, right? I haven't seen a bonus. Put your money where your mouth is, right? That person's, quote, business love language is monetary. Like, they want to see the fruits of their labor. They're seeing themselves work hard for your company, and they want to see that. There could be somebody else who's like, their whole thing is they need to hear it from you. So you have to make sure you say thank you, and, oh, you killed it in that one project, and you did great I heard you on that call, and you did great. And to them, that's it, right? That's how they know they're doing well, and they feel satisfied in their role, and they feel that they're meeting expectations. And I think, that's something that I've really learned in creating lasting changes, understanding how you give your feedback per somebody's business love language. It really matters.
And that's a great concept. And I think it's so interesting, because this is, again, a topic for another day, but how do you scale that? When you're, that's the ideal scenario, right? Steve, any last thoughts on implementing lasting change?
This issue is interesting, because being a male attorney, I'm EQ deficient in many respects, right? We're very pragmatic. I'm talking about analytics, looking at implementing change for productivity. But there's a whole dimension to a law firm that's fundamental to firm culture, that's fundamental to the existence.
Yeah.
So one of the exercises we've done, and we realize it's been missing in the firm, and we need to bring it in, is the ability to analyze personalities, getting to understand each individual employee, their strengths, their deficiencies, their inabilities, their need to be satisfied in what they're doing, but at the same time understanding personalities. Because when you look at somebody who may be an analytical person, like an engineer type brain, they integrate technology in a completely different way to somebody that possibly emotionally driven, somebody that just reacts and doesn't want to go through the steps of doing it. So from our firm's perspective, this side of it is fantastic, the change side, but without taking into account individuals, personalities, characters, their needs and wants individually, your firm will fail irrespective of how great your firm is. Because satisfactions are important.
I've seen that very thing. It's such a good point because like when I have done big business transformation initiatives or change management, kind of coming in and helping with a big project that involves a change management perspective, hopefully that starts at the beginning of the project and not just when they're about to launch and all you can do is sort of like help them communicate it in a nice way, but really having that be integral from the beginning is understanding the team ethos as well, which is just interesting. So I want to just, if there are any questions, please make your way or raise your hand so that the mic can come to you. But in the meantime, I know we've kind of talked about this at a very theoretical level. I understand that you might walk out of here being like, okay, but what do I do? Oh, am I being walked off?
Like the Oscars.
Very briefly, I will leave you with some practical thoughts. So the thing is that change management really is it's of a particular. So you think about an initiative you've got trying to implement something that's a big change for folks. It's going to impact a lot of people, a lot of different teams. They've all got their different areas of focus and kind of expertise. What it is really proactively managing points between idea and outcome. So it doesn't have to be a rigid discipline. A few kind of core principles can almost all be applied, and they were echoed here like just so effectively. Thoughtfully anticipating impact and potentially defensive behavior. Gathering insights from all stakeholders, not just the decision maker, is critical. That starts kind of the collaborative buy-in process. Reassuring your teams of what will not change. Setting expectations, evaluating risk, and measuring your success. You know, even by just shifting your mindset to understanding that change is just very tough for humans, and especially for lawyers, and asking these questions in your team without kind of getting hung up on specific stages or resources, you will begin to see the benefit. So I encourage you to sort of shift your mindset along those lines and understand the human side and the psychological side. And hopefully that's where we need like a part 2, I feel like, but we'll leave it at that. And if anyone's got questions, happy to take them or finish up.
Just so you know, we blinded here. We cannot.
Yeah, we can't see anything.
So, just make sure we go from this side to that side to keep him fit running back. Running back and forth.
Thank you. So I've heard it mentioned, I guess, a couple times where each of you have kind of touched on some of the, I guess, change or managing change individually. So I guess the question I have, and I'm trying to think of the right way to put this, but how do you manage change as an individual, as a leader, from the perspective of recognizing that you're the one who needs to make the change in order for your team to be able to move forward, and then also kind of juxtaposing that with not wanting to be overly critical of yourself as well?
I would say the best way is to have somebody in charge of the project that's not the leader, and the leader is one of the stakeholders, but there's a team of stakeholders. That's a short answer. It doesn't work for everything, but
to tell you from our perspective, I think the leader has to say, what are we missing and what do we need? Then getting the right people in the firm to work on that. But I think you've got to understand why you're doing what you're doing. Why am I implementing this piece of technology? What's the benefit? Is it going to make people more productive? Is it going to help on the business side from an analytics perspective? Is it going to have accountability for people so that you know what they're doing? How will that streamline our process and take it? And one very good example of that is, I've always said the same thing, that if somebody in my office, whether it's a paralegal or lawyer, has to take a few weeks off, God forbid, for ill health or something else, are people able to step in and take over what they do so the firm keeps running with those clients. And without the use of technology, without an understanding of being able to access data and information, you then have somebody who's so indispensable that it creates a real problem if they leave for whatever the reason. So I think you've got to think from a leader's perspective, what value is this piece of technology bringing to the table? How do we want to use it? And then look within your team or even outside to get buy-in to explain the process and the value. But I think you've got to explain to people why you're doing this, and you actually genuinely have to believe it's valuable, because without sincere belief, I think it's going to be very hard to persuade anyone else in the firm.
I'd actually like to address one little tiny piece of what you said. So when it comes to leadership and leadership training, that's not my wheelhouse. You got plenty of other people here to listen to, but the one comment that you made about being self-critical, that is my wheelhouse. And so when it comes to our own inner critic, we all have it, right? I think most of us are harder on ourselves than most other people around us. Is just noticing if that's coming up, if that is happening, if you are feeling self-critical, and just check in with what that's about. Because often the self-critic has something to say. They just don't say it in the nicest way, but sometimes it's like, I don't really like the reason that you're saying that, because I need to go get more information and I need to do something different. But sometimes it's just the product of an old pattern that's coming up, and it might be an opportunity to delve into that a little bit and be able to release it. So that's kind of that's a whole other panel.
I would love to chime in too on your question. So I think the other end of what you had talked about in terms of having awareness as a leader about the change that you yourself need to implement. So I find that talking through things on a large level with, a colleague, a friend, just to wind it all back to an event like this where you can talk shop and workshop something through. There's something about saying it out loud and somebody that you trust and respect enough to gently poke holes and, uncover things to help you sort of visualize what it is that you're doing and where the gaps may be. But I think those conversations are really important. And so, every leader needs a mentor and a coach, or however you want to call it. And so I think that having that humility is probably the short answer to your question of that we don't know everything, no matter how experienced we are, and no matter how much we've done and seen, that there's always something we're missing. It's a blind spot of you don't know what it is that you don't know. And being open and having that humility constantly. For me, that's been something that's really been important, is to always be open to new ideas, to feedback, to, talking something out loud. And I know when I'm talking something out loud, I know I'm going to get holes poked, but I'm inviting that in. I'm like, I need this. No, you're right. And, for me personally, when I have been doing this recently, it's like the same two things are coming up. I'm like, all right, that needs to happen. So I think just saying it out loud and having a trusted colleague or a friend even, that sometimes the best conversations take place with someone who's not in the law at all, Yeah. I mean, they can see things that have nothing to do with, but definitely fellow law firm owner friends and colleagues that you make, relationships that you make at places like this, I think help a lot.
I think we just have a few seconds left. There was one question. Yeah.
So I work in a really high volume practice, a public defender's office, and we utilize our legal secretaries a lot for a lot of the client interaction. And they are sort of what you were describing, Angela. Like, I think a lot of them aren't very confident in different ways, and they're a little intimidated by the attorneys, no matter how aggressively friendly we are. And we try to ask them exactly what Sonia was saying. Like, we onboard them. We're like, let us know if you see gaps in the system. Let us know how we can be better. We really want your fresh eyes. But we don't, they are the people who we get the least amount of input from. But when we get an idea from them, it's magic. So other than having monthly meetings, which turn into daunting Zoom calls of just silence from them, how do you foster on a continuing but also not a time-sucking basis to create that environment where those ideas can come about and give your team the confidence to really reach out and just be like, hey, let us know. And if it doesn't work, great, but give us more information.
That's really tough.
I'll give you my 30-second answer. One-on-one meetings as against group meetings, where you meet with them individually, where they feel safe to speak and give you feedback, as against the group team setting where people may be intimidated. That's my 2 cents.
But even with that, I mean, we're dealing with a remarkably hierarchical industry, right? I mean, I've run focus groups with people across the board at a single firm with all different roles, and nobody says anything except the partner. And I've run the exact same focus groups with, these visioning sessions or trying to figure out change readiness or that kind of thing with, paralegals from across, 10 different firms, and they have a lot to say. So it's I don't have an easy answer. It's something you got to keep kind of working on. But I mean, practically speaking, you can, if you have a single project that you want to get, a single challenge that you want to get addressed. I know we're out of time. You start by soliciting feedback. You start by finding different ways to solicit that feedback. Is it an anonymous survey? Is it brown bag lunch? Is it, all that kind of stuff. And you map out the approach for that change that needs to happen. And you bring folks in understanding that they are going to be nervous, potentially, for a lot of different reasons, and kind of just going into it with the approach that is understandable. And we're not here to, you're reassuring of what things are not going to change. I mean, all the kind of practical tips that I listed out, because you have to very slowly and incrementally do that. And I think the best way to do that is with specific projects and running them really well in a collaborative way. And then, lift and shift, right? Thank you. I know we're probably bumping up against the next session. So thank you, everybody. Happy to chat afterwards if need be. Thank you. And thank you, my wonderful panelists.
Thanks for having us.